We have already had a look at 10 different people who claim to be time travelers on this series, and whether you believe them or not, their stories are usually quite interesting. So that's what we're going to be having a look at today. So here is part 3 to 5 people who claim to be time travelers. Number 1. In the 1980s, a popular urban legend started to surface that told the story of Rudolph Fentz, a man in the 1950s who randomly appeared in Times Square and seemed lost and confused. He stood in the middle of the street until eventually a taxi fatally hit him and he passed away. Inside of his pockets were a number of strange items that would suggest that Rudolph wasn't from the 1950s. These items included a beer token for a saloon that nobody recognized, $70 in old banknotes, and a medal for coming third in a 3-legged race. These items were obviously strange, but the 2 weirdest items were a set of business cards that had Rudolph's name on them and an address on 5th Avenue, as well as a letter with this address on it that was dated June 1876 from Philadelphia. All of this led some people to believe that Rudolph had somehow traveled a century in the future. At first there was no records on Rudolph, and it was as if he never existed, until eventually they found a missing persons report from 1876 that was for a man by the name who fits this exact description. This story was quite famous in the 1980s and became a popular case of apparent time travel. Some believers actually tried to use this as a piece of apparent evidence that time travel was possible, even though there was no actual proof that any of this happened. Unfortunately for them, this story was eerily similar to a short story made in 1951 called I'm Scared, created by Jack Finney. Even the character's name was the same. This didn't stop the theorists though, as they claimed that Finney must have heard about this event and based his story off of that, and because of this tale was continuously used as evidence for the next several decades, being featured in magazines, books, and articles. It goes to show that people will utilize any piece of evidence they see fit, but at least we get an interesting story out of it. Number 2. In 2013, a 27-year-old Iranian scientist named Ali Riziki claimed that he had created a time machine of sorts. This machine wouldn't transport the subject to another period of time, but could instead predict your future and print the results. Using a number of complex scientific algorithms, it would tell you what was likely to happen in your future with an estimated 92% accuracy. This story was originally reported by Fars News, but a few days later the story was taken and replaced with a quote from a government official stating that this was not real. It could be that the government stepped in because they wanted to stop this false reporting, but some are saying that they could have intervened because the technology was real and they didn't want that to be public knowledge yet. It is entirely possible that there are scientists working on technology like this, but it's much less likely that they have had any success.
Iran's semi-official news agency published a breathtaking story this week. An Iranian scientist says he has invented a time machine. No reason to doubt that, right? Fars News originally reported Ali Rizegi created the machine, which uses complex algorithms to predict events like wars and oil prices with 92% accuracy. The Telegraph quotes Rizegi saying, "My invention easily fits into the size of a personal computer case and can predict details of the next 5 to 8 years of life of its users. It will not take you into the future, it will bring the future to you." Not your traditional time machine, it doesn't even have to reach 88 miles per hour. A writer for Gizmodo says, "That sounds a lot like fortune telling, tarot card reading, and staring into a crystal ball inside a laptop bag to me." And of course, Western media taking the story oh so seriously. A writer for The Atlantic says, "Okay Iran, we give up." But a writer for Wired isn't going down so easily, saying a US-Iran time travel arms race is now inevitable. Iran's woes at constructing an intercontinental ballistic missile now appear trivial. Nothing matters more than accurate, predictive intelligence. US policymakers must now ask themselves how long they are prepared to tolerate an Iranian monopoly on time travel.
Number 3. Sir Robert Victor Goddard was a senior commander in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and was a decorated veteran. Regardless of his power and respect, he claimed to have a paranormal experience, and at first, many found his story hard to believe. In 1935, while he was flying over a disused Air Force base in Scotland, he claimed to have seen it change into a fully functioning base. When he first entered the area, it was dilapidated and not in use. But on the way back he nearly crashed his plane and decided to return to the base to get his bearings. When he returned, however, the base had transformed into a renovated, fully functioning airfield. He specifically stated that there was mechanics in blue overalls working on 4 yellow planes that were parked on the runway. At the time of this claim, the mechanics in the Air Force wore tan overalls and the planes they used were silver, not yellow, meaning this claim didn't even make sense in a technical aspect, so it was understandably ignored. However, 4 years later in 1939, the airbase in question was actually renovated. The planes the Air Force had started using were now yellow, and the overalls the mechanics wore were now blue. It seemed as if Robert's vision had actually came true. Now, this series of events could have just been a coincidence, but it's a coincidence that added a lot of credence to Robert's statements. It has been used time and time again by time travel enthusiasts who claim that this is simply too accurate of a statement to be anything but a true account of time travel. Obviously, there's no actual proof, but the fact that it came from such a respected man is also something that's been talked about. He had a reputation that could have easily been tarnished with these statements, but he stood by them. Regardless of what you think, it is one of the more interesting and believable stories regarding time travel. Number 4. This video went viral on Twitter, garnering over 7 million views because of its intriguing nature. It shows a man walking down the street when another man walks into frame. The first man taps the other person on the shoulder, who then turns around. He notices an object swinging towards him and ducks. The video was titled "Time Traveler Comes Back to Save Himself" because of how similar these two men look, and because the first man did his best not to be noticed. Despite the skepticism, it is actually a real video. It happened in Turkey, and the man who was quote-unquote saved gave an interview to a Turkish news channel explaining the situation. However, the contents of the video could still be staged, but it doesn't seem like they were attempting to promote or sell anything, which is usually the case with these staged videos. It still remains a mystery as to what happened here, but it's definitely interesting, and it's become one of the most popular apparent time travel videos of the last few years. Number 5. This last one is not actually a person who claims to be a time traveler, but instead a person who has technically traveled through time. Peggy Whitson was an astronaut for NASA who spent more time in space than any other American person. Exactly 665 days, 22 hours, and 22 minutes. This amount of time created an interesting side effect. Because Peggy had spent almost 2 years of her life in space, she was a part of a process known as time dilation and came back to Earth younger than she would have been. The time difference was a mere 0.02 seconds, so it didn't have any noticeable effect, but this was an example of somebody actually traveling through time. It is a technicality, but still an interesting story, and this could easily happen on a much larger scale in the future, and it is possible that we will see a noticeable effect happen.
So let's start with the most common time dilation equation you'll find in a relativity textbook. It is T sub moving equals gamma times T substationary. T sub moving is the time experienced by someone who sees the clock moving. T substationary is someone who doesn't see the clock moving, and gamma is a factor unique to relativity. It's called the Lorentz factor. It is equal to 1 for something not moving and greater than 1 when something is moving. Given that gamma is greater than or equal to 1, it means that the time experienced by a person seeing the clock move is more than the time experienced by someone who doesn't see it move. And this means that someone moving ages more slowly than a person who isn't. If we take number 1 as seeing the clock to be stationary and number 2 as seeing it moving, we see that number 2 experiences more time than number 1. However, relativity requires that the laws are the same, no matter who is not moving, and this poses a problem. Suppose that we say number 2 is stationary with respect to his clock, and number 1 says that the clock is moving. Then number 1 experiences a longer time. Okay, so this is a problem. If you pick person 1 to be the stationary with a clock, then person 2's clock ticks faster. If you pick person 2 to be stationary with a clock, then person 1's clock ticks faster.
And that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. I'll leave a link here to part 1 and part 2, which you can go watch if you want to see some more apparent time travelers. This is an ongoing series on my channel, so if you want to subscribe for more, please consider doing that. But like I said, that's all for now. As always, until next time.